Hello, everyone, again. Long time no see. Matthew Janisek here. Uh, it's been a little too long. I agree. And I've had recently a couple people ask, are you going to do anything, put anything out there that's new? And I guess the answer is yes. We're going to start doing a little bit more. And excited about a couple new opportunities that you guys will learn more about in the upcoming days and weeks. But if people are interested in more of the long form of discussion of United States history and to a larger extent what's happening in our current world, stay tuned. Look for that. There might be a way that we can all interact together on that and create a forum of discussion. So I look forward to that soon. You'll be seeing and hearing more about it. And since most of the interest in what's going on in the current reality is what's generating the most questions from adults and students and people alike all over the place. How we are to process our current reality, the paradigm of today, the complexity of today, the narratives of today, and how they're presented and how they're consumed, and the effect all of this rising pressures in Western civilization, and to a greater extent the world. This is much bigger than Western civilization. And what that actually probably means in the long run is it's a spiritual crisis. So a framework of understanding our current reality needs to be understood through different points of view. So I think what might be the best and most helpful arena to start in for all of us in this audience, in particular Americans, that what is Western civilization? What does it mean to be a Western society in both the ideal sense and yet at the same time the practical application? Because those two things are not in parallel right now at all. So we need to understand the Western civilization's major tenets, belief structures, all that stuff, and how they and where they started, and then ultimately where some of those major tenets have been undermined. I mean, just undermined, and to a larger extent than the global crisis. And that's going to take more of a view eventually in international economics. And that, so we have a lot to discuss and a lot to learn, but I want to start the Western civilization construct with a truthful and short understanding of what classical Western civilization is and where the classics come from. It's been my experience that a lot of kids, high school kids, aren't necessarily aware of what the word means when you describe something as classics or classical. And so many people are aware out there. That is one of the arenas of world history curriculums out there in the public and even some of the private high school curriculums, is the glossing over or very, very little attention paid to classical Western foundations of Greece and Rome. That's maybe not explicitly taught anymore. And what you might want to do is ask a question about that. You know, if you find the tenets that we're going to talk about here, Western civilization, the United States, and the principles, as pretty important. So we're going to start with the Greeks, and that is the birthplace of classical Western civilization. Pericles is my favorite actor in that ancient Greece and Athens in particular, in that city-state, where majority rule, the vote had a place, but most importantly, I think what actually was a culture of tolerance began to develop, which means in the very first place, some political figure, general, leader, whatever they may be in the ancient world, had to become tolerant and want to receive input, criticism, whatnot. As we fast forward to George Washington putting together the first cabinet, wanting a bunch of different ideas. But that concept began with Pericles. It didn't last very long. because I think the humility that is needed in that to implement that is it's just a rare commodity, and we'll continue to talk about that as a Western civilization principle. But Socrates ultimately took advantage of all of the ideas and the free and open exchange playground, if you will, of philosophy to begin in ancient Greece, and what that could do for people. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and then knowing that Aristotle is Alexander's main teacher. So something out of the beauty of education and an honest one and a search for the truth can give people, not that conquering people is great, but the expanse and having the power, knowledge, and ability to think for yourself is another foundation of Western civilization. So then we fast forward to, I don't want to fast forward until we hit what happened to Socrates. We all know, if you know and paid attention to history at all, Socrates was had to kill himself, taken out with hemlock because he criticized too much. At some point, somebody said, you can't do that. And who's the they? The they are always those in power. So, but the pattern and the base idea of critical thinking, independent thought, the journey, questioning reality, and the search for truth starts there. And the Romans will pick up on that. The Romans will go through their period of the Republic, which is the highlight period of the Roman classical age, which is the idea of public participation, limiting a little bit the power and expanse of the emperor. So the Roman Republic period, and one of the guys that I just love through it all is Cicero, defining what the virtues and characteristics are of individual men and human beings. That every individual has to know the difference between right and wrong. That's a sense of justice. And there is an inherent right and wrong in every situation that we are always presented with. That idea goes back even prior to the classical age in the world of Egyptian duality. But that's a story for another day. But you have to know the difference between right and wrong, and there is. Today's era, we can see that we've been watered down with that by allowing everyone to have their own truth. If everyone gets to have their own truth, then you can never pinpoint a difference between right and wrong, and then you'll have chaos, which is a lot of what we have. The second is prudence. The characteristic of civic virtue that Cicero discussed is prudence. The decision making, first you have to know what to do, right or wrong. Then you've got to make a choice, whether you're going to choose right or wrong in every situation. In abstract situations that require an understanding that allows a thinker to take the abstract and make it concrete. Okay, we'll provide more examples on some of these a little later, but the next characteristic that Cicero discussed was fortitude. Individuals need to develop strength, inner strength, emotional strength, strength of mind and strength of heart, because the world is not a fair place. The world is going to throw at you all the things that will lead to your demise, as well as your enlightenment. But fortitude, we are all going to suffer tragedy. We will all suffer pain and loss and tragedy. And what do we do when faced with those difficulties in life? How do we adapt to overcome? That's fortitude. And the last of the characteristics is temperance. All individuals need the ability to control their passions. As you must control yourself. Okay? And yourself must be in balance with your community. Because there's also a realization in Western civilization, in the ideal sense, that you and your fellow man are no better than one another. And you're all entitled to the same what will become called the inalienable rights. Temperance. And those are the four virtues: justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. All individual citizens need to possess these, which means they need to be taught these as well. But the focus of today does not allow for the teaching of civic virtue in that great of detail, because it invites a discussion of the questions between right and wrong and what those answers might be. And when you get into a public debate or discussion about right and wrong, and it becomes impossible to engage in because truth can now be defined by every individual. Okay. This is a framework for understanding why we are having a difficult time even communicating as Americans. So that takes care of the classic age. Let's fast forward now to the age. Actually, I should say this is somewhat simultaneous age. But let's look at the long-term benefits that would come from the crossover. And the more important component to Western civilization than the classics is the impact of Christ and Christianity as both an ideal sense of spiritualism in Western civilization, but also one of abuse at times as well. And it has to be seen. How can you differentiate those two ideas? This is the way that you can think about the impact of Christianity let's start from the spiritual point of view, by following the messages of Christ. Following Christ as an individual is different than being an institutional church member and following the dictates of the institution. If we remember the tenets of Jesus Christ, he was brought into the world as a manifestation of God and challenging the sinners who were in positions of influence and authority that were part of the institution. Your Pharisees, your Sadducees, right? The Romans themselves. Jesus was critical of those institutional abuses of power and the individual need of citizens or human beings to identify that. So this is the most important element of Western civilization through the Christ story. Every citizen, if you hope to achieve the ideal, which is to be in heaven along the side of our Lord, that you would need to demonstrate the best effort you can make at following Christ. And it doesn't mean you're perfect, and it doesn't mean you're ever going to achieve it. But you're trying to do the best you can to follow a Christ-like life. And that means your priority is making yourself sharp first. Individuals, if you're going to have the wits and the wherewithal and the spiritual reality to be able to apply civic virtue concepts when you analyze your relationship between you and all the institutions that you're a part of, that we all cannot escape. But the institutions that control our lives, how do and when do we, the people or individuals, begin to be critical of that and not follow the blind dictates that we are growingly expected to follow today, which is leading to more of the tension in Western civilization, because there is still a sizable element of the population that lacks a trust in the institutions that have been governing our lives and telling us what to do for a long time. And there's great cause for that lack of trust. So here we are at the major tenets, Greek and Roman, adding to the Christ story. But now we understand the church itself using Christ's narrative at times and abusing the narrative. There's lots of ways and different discussions that we could have on that, but let's fast forward to the biggest demarcation point. Whenever the Church of Rome, what will later be the Catholic Church, when it begins to ally itself in political partnership with governments, meaning kings and monarchies around Europe, to control the population, and when their abuses become so paramount that Martin Luther ultimately says we have to split from the church because it has become corrupt. The Protestant protest revolution is there. That is following more Christ-like individualism, to have the discernment to know when the institutions are abusing power and when they should be called out. That will always require individual discernment. And any institution that claims to be in the pursuit of truth in Western civilization today that denies that and limits your ability to pursue truth in any way, the people need to awaken to that reality and snap back into line that the pursuit of truth can never be confined by the institution, because the pursuit of truth is an individual one and the relationship you have with a higher power. Now, if you are a growing member of society that has denied or declined that the existence of a higher power exists, then what substitutes that? Two elements can substitute the way modern individuals perceive reality. One is through that spiritual lens, the other is through the secular lens. And if you perceive reality through the secular lens, and if you believe that truth is subjective and everybody gets to define it for themselves, you've just lost the ability to have common values. They can't exist. How can you have the rule of law when common values no longer exist? Now, who or what entities or institutions are pushing the narratives that common values and truth is really in the eye of the perceiver? As the individual, you get to decide your own truth. These ideas in today's Western civilization are colliding with one another. And the consequences of that we're living through, okay? And the fact that individuals don't hold each other accountable. They're individuals, that's really not a good way to say it, but that accountability is a big piece to this. But if responsibility can be removed from individuals and replaced by institutions, so if people don't believe that there's a Holy Spirit of any kind, then who are they looking to provide them with the answers of authority? They could look at themselves, but then it's going to take the place of the government and the institutions of power that are secular. That's the government. So, and that's where we obviously see concentration of political power that has been abused throughout all of history in the consolidations of great state power in whatever form it takes to enact its own will, sometimes asked for by the people for good reason, but we have never seen in the history of mankind a long-term system of top-down authority that does not become abusive. This is the reason the Founding Fathers gave us the best limited government and a framework of power that would ultimately keep power in the hands of the people. And what we are living through now is the struggle of the legacy of the Founding Fathers and what they attempted to provide us with a framework for balancing political power artfully. And what we're living through right now, which is a greater demand for the federal or central government to seize more control over everything. And they're doing it with the hands and help and aid and assistance of big tech, of corporations, big oil, big tech, big pharma, big everything. The lobbyists control the story. The international banking system pulls the strings. And people in Western civilization that all realize this are leery of the future because we feel the growing tension. If you are an individual in Western society that has unplugged or cannot speak to any of these issues, but yet you play fantasy football or you know more television show characters than you understand what we're talking about, that ignorance is not helping solve this immense problem. So the immense problem being the ability to communicate about common values, what they should be, how we derive them, and what's going to be the cost and consequences if we abandon them. Okay? Because they're pretty severe. The history of the world has taught us that as well. So we'll wrap that up here. Look forward to more discussions with everybody, and stay tuned. There's going to be some fun things happening. Okay? Take care.